On Mars, the Sojourner rover is sniffing rocks this morning to find out if they're any different from rocks on Earth. If they are, it could tell us something about what the Earth was like before humans and snowstorms and floods started in participating with rocks. The humans used them to build huts, and the Earth weather started eroding them. Dr. Ed Stone, who heads the Jet Propulsion Lab, says the most interesting thing about this mission to him is how many different rocks there are. Look at these rocks. They're all different shapes and sizes on the surface of Mars, and the mission managers are looking at the pictures like these to figure out where to send the rover. Let me show you this week's Time magazine. This is really something. I have been talking to parents, and I am a parent, as you know. Mars is on the cover. Look what's in. They got a fold-out. It's not like the old foldouts we looked at when we were in college, but it's pretty dramatic in its own way. It's the big wide shot of the first picture of Mars.
Similar to that panoramic we saw.
Yeah, and it's kind of a keeper. I've been telling people to record the pictures on videotape when they see them here, and picking up the first pictures for Mars in 21 years' time, or you can pick them up out of a magazine like this and pick them up out of the paper. Just keep them as a keepsake for your kids. My 4-year-old likes the pictures on TV. He's not going to understand this when I take this magazine home to him, but when he's 8 or 10 years old, he'll go back and say, yeah, Dad, I remember the Mars rover and stuff. So it's a nice keepsake. Look at Squid. Look at Yogi. The rover now sending down a tour around the landing zone, which we'll get to see for the first time in a couple of hours. We'll bring the picture show to you live as soon as it's available. Now, let's go to some...
We'll show you some of the monster pan. Peter Smith will show some of the spectral data that we're beginning to unravel, Jim Bell, and start describing in a little more detail the geology that we're seeing from the images by Mike Malin.
At the end of the second Martian day, IMP, the Pathfinder camera, rose up. We now have the ability to look at our landing site from a standing position. There are those large boulders that formed much of our horizon when we were in the seated position now seem small. And as we look over them and realize they're only 1 or 2 feet high, we have a new perspective. With this new perspective, let's look again together at some of the features that have become familiar to us in the last few days. Imagine looking down at the rover exit ramp, seeing the Sojourner where she stopped after first rolling onto Mars, and now you're raising your head towards the direction that she is traveling today, near a rock named Yogi, and finally you turn your head towards the south and look past the Twin Peaks that we've been describing towards the interesting collection of rocks. And if I can have the video.
Those mountains look even taller from the height of a person's head, which is the perspective of these pictures. The others were down at ground level.
Now let me show you a few stills. And the first one is back to the collection of rocks, and I'm going to try and go sort of in reverse order to the video you just saw and point out just a few of the features that we are discussing in the science area, and then we're going to have some more detailed discussion from my colleagues here on my left. But just to introduce the subject, as you look at this collection of rocks, for scale, this rock right here, from top to bottom, which seemed so large yesterday, is really about 1 foot high. And if you were walking down a trail, you'd step right over it and wouldn't be too impressed. But yesterday we thought it was huge. And as you look at this collection of rocks, and we've seen this in stereo, which I'm not able to display to you today, but certainly in the near future, hopefully tomorrow, you notice there's kind of a little swale along here. This is actually a channel back behind those rocks. We're on the edge of a channel. And now if I can have we're going to discuss this more. Mike Malin is going to talk about this. And then the next slide, we go to the right. These are the twin peaks that Ron Greeley discussed yesterday. Now you can see the layering very prominent on this right-hand peak that's sort of rounded. And this conical shaped peak with its peculiar coloration on the slope is really one of the interesting features that we are hoping to get a close-up, lossless, full color, everything we can do data set on that peak. This is really very interesting to us. The next one shows what we affectionately called the couch in the background, which yesterday looked like it was sitting on this rock. But now, obviously, it's way into the background and still has a very unusual appearance, but definitely a rock. Let's see. And now I'm going to talk a little about the rover. Matt has already mentioned this. Perhaps we didn't coordinate as well as we should have, but I'm going to show some of the same slides. But maybe I'll give it a little different thrust as I talk about it. The next picture, please. This is where the rover ended up at the end of, I believe it was the second day. It's where it exited off the ramp. This is seen now from the standing position. And this is Barnacle Bill here to the left. Now this wheel being broken is not really broken. This is a parallax effect that I've talked about in the past. So this is something we can correct later in the future, so just ignore that. But you can see there's a little bit of a depression around this rock, and lots of texture in the soil. In fact, the soil looks quite a bit different. If you look at this little pebble here, there's actually a little streak of sand to the left of it. A lot of interesting things. Looks very different from this view to us. And then the next picture, this is as the rover, yes, Sojourner was making her turn, and you can see the wheel tracks where it turned going around to aim itself at the rock. Next picture, you've already seen this one. Next picture, please. This is looking back at the spacecraft, and then again I'm going to show it against the rock. Next picture. But again, look at these wind streaks off of these pebbles, and certainly off of this larger rock. It looks very different from this direction, and the texture in the soil is beautifully preserved in this picture. These are compressed 6:1, whereas the pictures you've seen yesterday were 12:1. So we have a substantial improvement in this picture. And now as to the future of Sojourner as she makes her way across the Martian surface, the next picture, oh, excuse me, this is a close-up of the rock itself taken from the rover's rear camera in color, and here's the APXS, and this is one of the deployment springs right here that pushes it up against the rocks, and here's the texture of Barnacle Bill and the coloration. Next picture, please. This is the Yogi rock, now seen from the standing position, and the soil that the rover will be standing in at the end of today. And I believe that's the end of the slides. Actually, these last few days have been the greatest thrill of my professional life, and the members of the science team from all over the United States, with international members from Germany, Denmark, the British Isles, and Russia, are working closely with the Image Processing Lab to bring the experience that we are having to you as soon as possible. And we are trying our very best to get these pictures to you in a way that you can understand them as we're trying to understand them. But in the huge rush of data last night, starting about 10 p.m. and ending at 11:30, when the monster came back, it was just an awesome flood of data. And we are hoping to be able to show as much as we can to you by tomorrow. But to talk about some of the details of the mineralogy as we know it today and as we've been able to learn it over the night, Dr. Jim Bell from Cornell